In this video, we've got a subscriber's white Peterbilt that he recently acquired brought to me with a host of problems, some of which he knew about, some of which he didn't. Like this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. There are many problems in this video. We can't go into all of them, so you have to just watch and find out what we find. Hey guys, Josh with the Update channel, and in this video we've got a 3406E that's got a host of problems. Got our official list here. Excessive smoking under load, low power under load, poor fuel mileage, loss of prime after sitting, poor Jake performance. It's backfired through the air cleaners, but that went away. Engine fan always on. So that list of problems, the fuel system seemed like the most likely to start with. Now this is a 3406E, so it has a separate fuel manifold, and the fuel system goes like this. From this line into the fuel manifold to the fuel filter, this is the secondary fuel filter, out from there into the ECM. Yes, it has a fuel cold ECM on the 40 pins. From there to the back of the cylinder head, goes through the cylinder head to the injectors, comes out of the front of the cylinder head, back into the same manifold, and then through the pressure regulator. That is the flow through the fuel system in the engine. Now, most of the symptoms, white smoke, low power, seem like it was failing to prime or losing prime, seem like fuel related. So that's why we're going to check this first. Luckily, he's already got a CompuCheck fitting, so we can check our fuel pressure. Now, one thing that was odd right away was the fuel itself. Now, it's hard to see. I should have pulled some out, but it's dark, very dark. Like, it seems like it has carbon. Possibly if this was a Huey engine, I'd be looking at oil in there, although I've never seen oil in the diesel fuel on a non-Huey engine, so kind of odd. Not sure what that would be, but it's got other problems also. You can see coolant leaks here, and it's leaking coolant pretty bad. Drip, drip. Yeah, it's just been dripping. And it's been sitting here for 3 days. It seems to have most of the problems from the customer's perspective when it's sat overnight. I've never seen a customer installed pressure gauge, I was going to say fuel pressure, on a cooling system before. 2 exhaust leaks. Packing is blown out here at the forward part of the manifold. Somewhat common on these engines, but also worse, we have a broken stud off in the cylinder head, and of course number 6, so the hardest one if you were to try and drill it out. Dipstick tube's loose. Obviously that's not causing a problem, but it is causing an oil leak, and I already discussed the coolant leaks. So first thing I always do before I even check fuel pressure is I always look at our ECM and see if we have a bias sensor or anything weird. So immediately notice that if you look at the intake manifold air temperature and also the fuel temperature, but mostly the intake manifold air temperature, it is biased. So it's showing 52, and the shop is, we'll say 66, 68, something like that. So it's not reading correctly, and it's been off for 3 days. So you like my palm tree? I also got a little oil can guy. These are things I've found over the years. I just keep them in my box. This Wonderlot picture has a big story. Maybe I'll discuss it one day. Ask me on the live stream I do next. So first thing we're going to do is we checked our primary fuel filter. It was full of fuel. Now the customer said it was losing prime, so I like to see if both filters are full of fuel. Sometimes you'll check and they'll be empty, or one of them's empty. And that can kind of lead you to find out why they are draining overnight usually. As you can see, full of fuel. Both of them were. So could not verify that complaint that it was losing prime. I think we need to start it and see what happens. So it fired up immediately and built fuel pressure to specification and quickly. So kind of weird. Not what the customer was stating. Now, doesn't mean he's not telling the truth. It may have done this 100 times for him, but sometimes you get here and it works for a mechanic. Really frustrating. What I'm doing here is a manual cylinder cutout test because while it did start easily, it sounds a little rough. Not like it has a dead cylinder, but I just wanted to see if perhaps one cylinder was very weak or possibly dead and just doesn't sound like it. Didn't find that though, they were all firing. So go back to the status screen and our coolant temperature is rising as you'd expect. But intake air temperature is not rising. And of course it should be once it starts, because you're getting the shop air, which is close to 70 degrees in there. So that's a problem. Still running. This is our intake air temperature sensor. Right there. Not the easiest to get to. This is the older style one. So let's see if we can mess with the wiring to the sensor just by wiggling it and twisting it and see if the temperature changes. It absolutely does. Ended up being the sensor, not the wiring. Troubleshot it. Customer approved replacing it. And this developed while we were running it. Let's just say a worse coolant leak. He's got a ball valve on the water pump outlet, and it needs to be fixed immediately. All right, so we have the cooling system draining right now, and giving that a minute while it dumps out of there. So I was getting ready to test drive this vehicle and see if we can verify some of the other complaints. Couldn't verify that it was losing prime. It fired right up, as you saw in the video. Built fuel pressure right away. The fuel filters were full. I actually reached out to John Goldsmith. Reached out to him. He actually had the cap part number for the check valves, the one-way valves that you can install. So that was pretty cool. He's always very knowledgeable and helpful. What was I going to do? Well, I started it up and it was just dumping coolant out of that little drain petcock. So that's why we're draining it. We're going to plug that right now because we can't test drive it with it literally pouring coolant out. If it's occasional drip, whatever. We are going to test drive it, see if we can verify that it's low in power. See if we can verify that it is white smoking. We have the fuel pressure gauge, I'll show you, mounted here so we can actually see it while it's driving. And you can see I've got my airlift there ready to fill this puppy back up with coolant once we're done plugging that off. On the test drive, look at this beautiful area we live in here. Great fuel pressure, by the way. Only thing we could verify was weak Jake's engine seemed to run great. So came back and draining the coolant again. The leak out of the rear of the oil cooler got way worse. It was basically pouring out when we got back, so gonna have to fix that also. Got the end section off, and this is the first time we're looking at the cooling system itself. The coolant's actually clean, but the inside of the cooling system, even though the coolant looks clean, is nasty. Like, probably the worst, or one of the worst cooling systems I've ever seen. It's not... I'm not even sure what this is. Pretty sure it's not a rodent like our last one, but it's got there's this muck everywhere. It's like a rust. There is rust accumulation on everything. It's like dirt, or possibly they've mixed coolant, something bad. It's really bad. Big pieces of metal all over the place too. Not looking too good. So we've got our new intake air temperature sensor in. Hey, it's reading correctly. This is the next morning, by the way. And we're going to fire it up again, see what's going on. That's our new sensor. And we've also resealed this. The housing was okay. Just needed O-ring and a gasket there. And coolant. And also, we had a discussion with the customer. He said he's been losing coolant before it started leaking. So let's do a bottle check. Cranking it now. Not starting. White smoke. Interesting. It was hard starting this morning initially, so I just showed you that, but the very next time it was still hard starting a little bit, and about 4 seconds later it fired up. A little bit of smoke, mostly whitish, and then it smoothed out. Had fuel pressure the whole time, so I don't really think we have a priming issue. There's a truck that comes in every winter, and I took a video of it about 2 years ago. I'll show you a clip of it, but it's kind of doing the same thing. It's hard starting when it's cooler, when it's sat overnight, and then it clears up. That one, though, smokes a lot when it's cold. This one does not do that as much. They're both 5EK serial numbers, too. I don't know if that's related. The customer did, though, say he's been losing coolant. It doesn't seem like it's leaking. I mean, it was leaking, but before it was starting to leak, he said it's been losing coolant. So what we're doing now is checking for compression bubbles in the cooling system with a bottle test, and I'll show you what we find. So doing our bottle test, our air compressor hot hose is isolated, just in case that would be causing any air in the cooling system, and we got a whole bunch of bubbles, folks. Number one cause of this is a sunk liner, which blows up the head gasket, possibly a cracked head, possibly problems with the liners. So I went to disconnect the batteries, and they were like this, no hold down. This battery's actually worn into and leaking battery acid in the battery box. Looks pretty destroyed. This week's Destruction of the Week is from Donnie in a Mac, and said driver was driving through and yeah, the engine made a really loud sound and then stopped all of a sudden. Pretty sure I know why. So looks like the rod just came right through the side of the block, almost cut this sucker in half. You can actually see all the way through the block, it looks like. You can see the oil gallery through the block. Pretty interesting. Thank you, Donnie. It's back to work. So I thought that was the only problem in the battery box, but no. This thing is super close to burning to the ground. Look at this. These are the battery positives. This is an aluminum box. And they are pretty much worn right through razor's edge through this box. This thing, it's amazing this did not arc out already. And with battery acid leaking out, that would have been pretty bad. Now looking at our jakes and our overhead, whenever I get the valve covers off, I look at the camshaft. Now 1.3 million miles, original cam from what I can tell, original head. Rollers are, well, they look like they're 1.3 million. They're still functional, but I would recommend replacement of the cam and rocker arms during that replacement. The guy to my left, he is...
This is my apprentice.
One of two of the apprentices here. He's helping me get the head off here. Didn't have a lot else going in the shop, unfortunately, that day, so kind of showing him the ropes. And here's some interesting finds. The upper radiator hose out of the radiator. Looking pretty nasty here on the cooling system. Something's going on here. So here's an interesting find. Found a lot of weird stuff on this engine, actually. I've been blowing out the injectors this way. Watch the injector top when I pressurize it. Oh, never seen that before. So what I was doing, I blow those out so all the fuel drains back into the tank, but you can see the injector spring is broken. That's number 2. Also, number 5 did the same thing. From what I can tell, they are original injectors, so 1.3 million. All the others were reman, so they had been replaced at least once and were not broken. So those two, definitely a problem. Here's with the injectors out. We were breaking the head bolts loose. And also removing the valve cover spacer. And found this. If you can't tell, this is a metric bolt holding the valve cover spacer plate in. Yeah, there's no metric bolts in this. So whoever put that in is a moron. Also, there's silicone everywhere. Why would you put silicone here? There's literally an O-ring that seals that. Is the silicone going to help the O-ring seal? Must be the same person that put the metric bolt in. There's silicone all over the place. Does not need to be here. Like here, look at how much is squished out. They even used them on the bolts going through the front structure. What? That...
Real nasty habit you got there.
That's just dumb. So, breaking the head bolts loose. Never seen this before either. The head bolts are actually bubbling. You see it? Around the spacers whenever you'd loosen them, but we got it off. Those head bolts were super tight. Very hard to get off, but we got them off. Head is off. We're looking mostly for a blown head gasket. That's what I suspected, although it could be a cracked head. It could be something with cavitation in the liners the way the coolant sits. Probably the biggest surprise on this job so far is that the head gasket looks okay. I don't see any signs of a blown head gasket. That's just oil. So what we're looking for is the fire ring to be blown out or have a bunch of carbon passing to the head bolts. Gonna look at the head here. I already know the answer though. I do not see any visual cracks, which is amazing considering the way the cooling system was. I would think this would have had several overheats and a cracked head possibly. Don't see anything though. Pretty unusual, I would say. So let's look at the block though and see what's going on. So the block though, look at the water ferrule holes. As suspected, it is pretty bad. The holes themselves where the ferrules sit, not too recessed, but you can see that kind of weird buildup, rust, calcium, whatever that is built up all over the coolant passages. Here's what I did find though, folks. And you might think this is whatever, but it's actually a big deal. So, what I can tell, probably original liners and pistons in this, but if you zoom in, and this is going to be hard to see, but I'll get the lighting right. Right here, and this is all over this number 6 particularly, is this. These are not scratches. These are behind the glazing, and you can't feel them. See that? And it's on the other side. It's on the intake side of the liner also. What it looks to be, the way it's vertical also, is probably cavitation's working its way through this liner to the point that it's almost all the way through, and you're getting compression gases push through on the combustion stroke. This is as far as we could get though, folks. The customer hasn't decided what he's going to do yet. I will hopefully be able to give you an update video in the future. I want to thank you for watching, and I will leave you with this. I mean, silicone has its place around toilets.